From Syria to Turkey to Egypt and Iran, Russia is expanding its influence across the Middle East and beyond. How is Russia changing relations in the region? Hello, I'm andAli, and this is The Heat. As one of the foreign military powerhouses operating in Syria, Russia has planted itself as a major player in the Middle East. Now Russia is expanding to strengthen relations, from military exercises with Egypt to increased cooperation with Turkey. For more on Russia's increasing role in the Middle East, CCTV's Kevin Ozebeck joins us from Moscow. And Kevin, Russia has been increasingly active in the Middle East. How is it expanding its role there?
Well, it sure has been. We're definitely seeing Vladimir Putin try to extend and expand his sphere of influence. First and foremost, there's the situation in Syria. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is obviously President Putin's strongest Arab ally. So definitely Russia does not want to see Assad go, so it can keep that relationship and it can keep that military presence in Syria. But moving beyond Syria, we've also seen Egyptian President General Sisi and Vladimir Putin essentially courting each other. Not too long ago, we saw the first joint Egyptian and Russian military exercise. Those exercises will continue into next year. Also, Vladimir Putin wants to have his hand in the situation in Iraq. He's promising more weapons, more financial support to the country as it tries to battle ISIS. Just this year, the King of Morocco had his first visit to Russia in more than 15 years. When it comes to Turkey, there was a huge row between Moscow and Ankara earlier this year when Turkey shot down a Russian jet over Syria. But we've seen relations between Turkey and Russia mellow and improve. And now there's talk that both countries will work together to lay the groundwork for a natural gas pipeline to fuel the energy needs of Europe.
Now, Kevin, as the United States decreases its involvement in the region, does Russia see itself filling a void?
Well, not everyone does think that the U.S. is distancing itself from the Middle East. There's a number of reasons that analysts say the U.S. is still very actively involved in the Middle East right now, but right now it doesn't have very many options when it comes to trying to stop the crisis in Syria. But of course, many also say that when it comes to the benefits for Russia here, this gives Vladimir Putin an opportunity to take the focus outside of Russia. Right now here in Russia, some economists believe this is a country on the brink of a recession. We know that the ruble has been devaluing. So as Putin tries to sell this Middle East strategy to the people, he's seeing a lot of support for it, and it works for him right now. So that's why many are saying this is a prime opportunity for him to try to expand his influence in the Middle East.
Thanks, Kevin. That's CCTV's Kevin Ozebeck reporting from Moscow. Joining us now for more from the U.S. state of Rhode Island, Vladimir Golstein is a professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University. From Cairo, Khaled Dawoud is Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Al-Ahram Weekly. And with us here in the studio is Ali Cinar. He is Executive Vice President of the Turkish Heritage Organization. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Vladimir, as our reporter just pointed out, Russia is increasing cooperation with Turkey. It's been carrying out military exercises with Egypt. And of course, we know about the Russian involvement in Syria, very significant military involvement in Syria. Question is, why is Russia investing so much in expanding its influence in the Middle East?
Well, historically, Russia was always involved in the Middle East. First of all, part of it is borders there, so they have much more direct interest in this area than, for example, the United States, which is not bordered with any of the countries. It's a Russian sort of, so to speak, backyard. So since 19th century, they were studying the area. They were making peace and wars with Turkey and Iran and many other countries. And they continue to involve it under the Soviets as well. The only moment when they sort of withdraw is during Russian perestroika and collapse of the Soviet Union, when the country was dealing with internal problems. However, that lack of involvement in the last 20, 30 years, I think, sent the wrong message to the United States, that they basically can control the area, the region, any way they want. And now Russia is sort of coming back And I think so they are kind of more or less returning to, to the area, and they're returning with a particular demand of multinational, multi-interest world. So they will continue to negotiate with Iran and Turkey and any other players in the area, and try to sort of keep their alliances together.
Khaled, Russia may be returning to the area, but the United States has been the dominant power in that region for a very long time. And by one metric, it still remains a dominant power. It has the highest number of troops in the area, 35,000. It has a big military presence. In other terms, it has something, dozens, hundreds of pieces of military equipment, or military assets, as they sometimes called. What's happened? What has changed in the Middle East? Why do Middle Eastern leaders find the Russian involvement so attractive?
Well, as you mentioned, the United States has always been there, mainly because of its interest in the oil that comes out from the Arab Gulf region. I mean, the United States has had always some sort of military presence in Saudi Arabia. When Saddam Hussein, late Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait in 1990, it was U.S. troops that led the coalition to end the occupation of Kuwait. And then later, of course, we saw George W. Bush, the former president, taking this decision on his own to conquer and occupy Iraq. So the United States has always had some heavy presence, but I guess what made a lot of difference was the shift from the George W. Bush administration to the Obama administration. And Obama's doctrine, as they call it, has been to pull the U.S. troops out of the region. Of course, he ended to a great extent the U.S. military presence in Iraq. He decided to cut down the U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and I guess Obama is about to finish his term in about 2 months or 3 months, and he would credit himself for not getting involved in any outside war or outside the U.S. borders. And probably also part of Obama's doctrine has been to give the front lines to other countries which might have a closer interest to the Middle East region. So, for example, when it comes to Libya, he wants European nations to play a bigger role, or even in Syria, which many people would hold him responsible for, that he hasn't had a very positive or action policy towards Syria because of his feeling that it's not U.S. interest involved in Syria, leaving the room in that case for Russia to make a stronger presence in the region, considering that from the Cold War era, Syria has always been an ally for the former Soviet Union and later for Russia, while, of course, the United States has had stronger relations with other nearby countries. So the absence of the United States, the Obama doctrine, the retreat of the United States in getting involved in outside conflicts or in outside problems probably allowed Russia to make such comeback, although in a very much different form. It's not the Cold War. The Soviet Union is not there anymore. And the current Russia that we know with President Vladimir Putin gives nothing for free. It's not like they give grants or help or assistance to countries in the region for free. They expect something in return. They get involved in Syria. They ask for military bases. They get closer to Egypt, for example. They ask for signing of very lucrative arms deals or to build nuclear reactors in Egypt. So it's not the same Russia, but Russia in a different form that has a bigger interest in the region, considering the U.S. absence and its traditional competition with the United States.
Ali, let's look at the Russian relationship with Turkey. That relationship reached a bit of a low in 2015 when Turkey shot down a Russian plane. Ankara subsequently apologized for what had happened there, and Russia is now using, or there is consideration of Russia to use the Incirlik air base. What's changed? Why this major shift in the Turkish relationship with Russia?
So overall, when you look at it, the trade, the business between Turkey and Russia went down almost like 50%. There was a big business. The Turkish investment is $64 billion in Russia, only contractors. So the Turkey started to feel the lack of the business between Russia, and Turkey said, we need to do something since the trade is very important between Russia and Turkey. And then the President Erdogan started to communicate with the President Putin and his team to negotiate and solve this issue. In addition that, there's a lot of going on in Middle East, especially on the security and terrorism. So Turkey is looking for a peace in Middle East. And since Russia is right now in Syria, is very actively, Turkey wants to talk and maybe have a common strategy in Middle East with Russia. So these are the important issues for Turkey. Trade and the security and working together are the two items that Turkey wants to talk with Russia.
Vladimir, let's look at the Russian involvement in Syria right now. As I pointed out earlier on, there's significant military involvement by the Russian military in Syria. What's in it for the Russians? Is this just about, as Khaled pointed out, getting military bases in Syria, or is there much more to it?
Well, I think it's also the question of sort of Russia standing in the wall. They felt that during the last 20 years, they've been, pushed around. And this latest, foreign policy, United States doctrines that they can go in any part of the world and assert their will, and others better follow it, is not working anymore. Russia got their messages already when, there was a war in Yugoslavia, a war in Georgia, then Ukraine, and they basically said enough is enough. You just cannot run any region in the world by dictate. So Syria is their kind of stand in Middle East, where they basically say this is a very complicated region with complicated players. And one of the players which haven't been mentioned is China. And China also feels like Russia, that this is multinational world with a lot of involvements, and they just cannot go like what they did in Libya and destroy it and ram it into through every play and say, you better get along with it. So Russians feel that they need to assert their presence there, and this is a complicated region where things should be negotiated through diplomacy, not just through dictate or bombing or regime change.
Right. I just wanted you to take a listen to what President Putin said about Russia's involvement in Syria. Let's watch.
Our points of view on the Syrian problem are still not the same. But I think it is still possible, because we share a common goal, to solve the Syrian crisis. And I think in that case, from that base, we will look for a common solution that is acceptable to all.
So, Vladimir, we have a situation here where the United States is very reluctant to get involved militarily in Syria. Russia is involved. This is election season. Hillary Clinton, who could become president of the United States, has talked of a no-fly zone. Would that put her in conflict with the Russians?
Yeah, it will definitely result in the conflict if she goes on with this no-fly zone. But I think it's more or less pre-election rhetoric. She wants to look tough, because once sort of the situation becomes clear, the United States will realize that it will lead to the war. I'm not sure that Russia now in the position to back off, and it will be absolutely unnecessary escalation. What should be stressed is that things should be negotiated. Middle East is way too complicated. There are too many players: Iran, Turkey, Egypt, many other countries, Israel. And the United States cannot just let say oil states like Saudi Arabia do what they want, or make sure that nobody is touching Israel, and that's what the politics, more or less. Saudi Arabia does what they want as long as they don't touch Israel, and the rest of the countries better follow the orders. The situation is changed, and time to negotiate. And I think United States have to sort of deal with this.
Khaled, you wanted to say?
No, I mean, I think Syria is a very important testing ground. On how the United States and Russia are going to handle their future relations. Unfortunately, the Middle East region is in a big mess. Lots of traditional countries basically either torn into pieces or ended up in civil war, such as Libya or Syria or Iraq, and even in Egypt after the January 25th revolution and all the changes we've been through over the past 6 years. I'm not so sure of Egypt's ability to interfere in a very positive or useful manner in the conflict in Syria or the conflict in Yemen or the conflict in Iraq. But at the same time, I think Russia should consider on the long term that many Arabs and many Syrians do not look favorably, or actually are very much against the current Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad. And I guess Russia should play a more positive role in trying to solve this solution by convincing Mr. Assad to compromise and maybe recognize that it's going to be very difficult for him to stay in power after 6 years of massive war, after nearly over 350,000 people who were killed after all these bombs and raids. I mean, Russia should not just hold all its bets on the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, especially that the United States, together with its other allies like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, like maybe Turkey to a certain extent, although Turkey's position has likely changed after the latest coup attempt. Maybe they are not as active as they wanted to be before in attempts to overthrow the President Bashar Assad. But at the end of the day, I guess Russia would be doing the region a big favor if it manages to agree with the United States on some sort of compromise that will mainly benefit the Syrian people and stop this bloodshed. I mean, Mr. Bashar Assad, President Bashar Assad, he is very much involved in all the bloodshed that has happened. The opposition that's supported by the United States is also very much involved in the bloodshed and the killing and the immigration of millions of people, turning them into refugees. So if the United States, or particularly Russia, considering its historic relations with the region, wants to play a positive role, I guess it has to give some advice to President Bashar Assad that there is no room for him in the future of Syria if they truly want a compromise.
Okay. Ali, President Putin had a meeting with his Turkish counterpart just a few months ago. Let's listen to President Putin's view on the relationship with Turkey. Let's watch this.
We lived through a very complicated moment in relations between our states, and we very much want, and I feel our Turkish friends want, to overcome the difficulties in the interests of the Turkish and Russian people.
So we have Turkey, which is a member of NATO, a very important member of NATO. Do you think it's the Russian intention to push a wedge between Turkey and its other traditional Western allies in NATO?
I believe they are trying to, yes, make it Turkey closer to Russia. But when we look at Syria right now, Turkey is working closely with the United States and other allies, especially fighting against terrorism. And Turkey wants still Assad move out from the administration. I mean, Turkey has a big problem with Assad, and Russia is supporting Assad. And the refugee crisis still continues in the region, and this is one of the biggest problems for Turkey. And Assad is the #1 responsible for this refugee crisis. So when we look at overall the security perspective and being a partner of NATO, being an ally of NATO, there's a huge disagreement between Russia and Turkey. I can say that. And that's why Putin and President Erdogan came together to sit down and talk about this issue. On the trade side, it's fine, but on the security and Assad issue, I don't think there will be an agreement. And same with the Hillary Clinton perspective, Turkey is saying that we also want a no-fly zone, and Turkey is insisting for many years now.